Aaron Rodgers says he wants to come to the Jets, but the Jets and Packers have yet to strike a trade for the superstar quarterback. What's going on? We're going to discuss that today on the Locked On Jets podcast.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, this is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Thursday, March 16th, 2023, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com, thanking you for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. This podcast is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. If you like what you see or hear, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you're listening on a podcast source, please give the show a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube, please give this episode a big thumbs up. These things help the podcast out and help other Jets fans find Locked On Jets. Today, our episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Aaron Rodgers wants to come to play for the Jets in 2023. He said on the Pat McAfee Show Wednesday that's his intention. Over the last couple of weeks, the Packers have said that whatever Rodgers wanted to do, they would accommodate. So if he wanted to be traded to the Jets, they said, we will trade him to the Jets. However, there still is no trade in place. The Jets and Packers, they've been negotiating. They've been negotiating since the Super Bowl, if you've listened to reports that have come out in the last couple of days. However, there is no deal in place. Why is that? And the more you read about this, the more it seems like the Packers and Rodgers are in this really toxic relationship where it feels like they're kind of trying to hurt each other. The Jets are kind of caught in the middle of this right now. And, I think it's clear as far as Rodgers and the Packers goes, there's blame on both sides. Nobody's completely blameless in this whole scenario. Now, ESPN's Adam Schefter, who is now an avowed enemy of Aaron Rodgers, apparently, Rodgers told him to lose his number, has reported that the Packers are looking for a compensation package comparable to what Russell Wilson got, to what Matthew Stafford got. Packers apparently looking for 2 number 1 picks. And I think if you read between the lines here, Schefter's getting this information directly from the Packers. Now, I'm going to give you my own theory about this, and you can tell me whether this theory makes sense or not. I'm guessing part of the reason Rodgers is it has so many issues with Schefter is that his view is probably that the Packers have been leaking a lot to Schefter over the last couple of years during all the off-season acrimony Rodgers has had with the Packers. So maybe Rodgers views Schefter as a guy who's working with the Packers organization. You can tell me whether that's crazy or not. I just can't figure out why anybody cares about Adam Schefter one way or another. Otherwise, he's just a guy who breaks a lot of news. But I think the Packers are trying to play the media game right now. It certainly seems that way to me, where there's lots of leaks in the media. I mean, all these national reporters keep talking about how much leverage the Packers have. And I'm sitting there saying, excuse me, the Packers have a lot of leverage? This is what I'm looking at right now. I'm looking at a situation where the Green Bay Packers have a quarterback that they've told us they don't want him anymore. I mean, the CEO of the Packers last week, the chief executive officer, literally spoke to the media last week and said, Rodgers is going to come back if things don't work out the way we want them to. He essentially said that Rodgers coming back is not something we want. There are 31 other teams in the NFL outside of the Green Bay Packers. 30 of them do not have interest in Aaron Rodgers. There is one team with interest. Explain to me how the Green Bay Packers have a ton of leverage in this situation. If they bring Rodgers back, it's an enormous cap hit. I mean, it hurts them financially. And they have a situation with a young quarterback in Jordan Love where they got to make a decision on him soon. And they want to go with him. So you're essentially damaging your chances of moving forward with Jordan Love. The Packers have a ton of leverage. Now, in fairness, the Jets also have their own issues as far as leverage goes. Because the Jets, at this point in time, it doesn't seem like they really want to walk away. And all the other all the alternatives are gone. So, I mean, outside of maybe Lamar Jackson, it does not seem like the Jets are going to pivot to him. Anybody who's a credible quarterback is essentially off the board. Anybody who's like a halfway credible quarterback is off the board. So there's all this talk of who has the leverage, and a lot of the national media types are trying to claim it's Green Bay. I mean, I don't buy that. Now, again, I don't know that the Jets necessarily have all the leverage in the situation. Leverage is the new word of the day, and honestly, I never thought I'd be tired of hearing the word leverage when we're talking about trade negotiations, but I'm really tired of it. If I never heard the word leverage when we're talking about this trade again, it would be too soon. Essentially, it kind of comes down to which side blinks first, because everybody's got an incentive to get this deal done. The Packers don't want Rodgers. The Jets want him badly. Rodgers wants to come to New York. Everybody's hurt if this deal doesn't happen. The Packers are stuck with an unhappy quarterback, an expensive guy eating up their cap space. They can't play Jordan Love. Rodgers isn't going to be happy staying in Green Bay after everything that's gone down, and the Jets won't have a quarterback. So everything's lining up here for this trade to happen. I mean, there's all the incentives on each side point to a trade happening, but it hasn't happened yet. And it almost feels like the Packers are more worried about the optics of the trade than they are about getting the right deal for them. Because it's like, maybe they're worried about their fan base's reaction to what they're going to get for Rodgers, but I've been saying this for weeks. Why should the Jets give up anything? Nobody else, the Packers want to dump the salary. I mean, this is for Green Bay. It's essentially a salary dump. Now for the Jets, it's a little bit more. Of course, I think the Jets view it a little bit differently. I don't think the Jets view it as a salary dump, but the team with Aaron Rodgers, they have no other option but to trade him to the Jets right now. And part of me wonders, like, maybe are the Packers waiting for a mystery team to jump in and try and up the bidding because they're afraid of how it will look if they just give Aaron Rodgers away to the Jets? Maybe that's it. And there is some precedent in recent history. Back in 2008, it felt in the summer of 2008, it seemed like it was clear that Brett Favre was going to be traded to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And at that point, the Jets were the mystery team that jumped in and kind of snatched Favre away from Tampa Bay. So maybe the Packers are hoping history will repeat itself. But of course, there's one key difference if you remember that summer of 2008. At that point, Favre did not really want to play for either of those teams. He did not really want to go to Tampa Bay, did not really want to go to the Jets. Favre wanted to either go to the Vikings or the Bears because he wanted to punish the Packers by staying in the NFC North. The difference here is Rodgers has said, I want to be a Jet. Rodgers is recruiting free agents to the Jets already. So it's difficult to see. I mean, everybody, I don't think anybody's played this perfectly yet. I think the Jets, I've been saying through the course of the offseason that I did not want the Jets to get into this situation where there's no plan B if it doesn't work out. Some of it was beyond their control. But looking at this situation, it's really a matter of who panics first. The Packers can play this out a little bit longer. Aaron Rodgers has a team option that apparently, the first day it can be picked up is tomorrow. Apparently they have until like almost week 1 of the season to pick up this option. So I guess they could play this out for a little bit longer. But the question is, do they want to get to training camp with Aaron Rodgers on their team? Now, I think for the Jets, when do you want to strike a deal? Well, ideally to calm the fan base as soon as possible, but I think that this is less important. I think this is less time sensitive than I might say in another case for a couple of reasons. First of all, there's no issue with learning the offense. Nathaniel Hackett's worked with Aaron Rodgers in the past. Rodgers ran his system for a couple of years in Green Bay. He knows this system as well as any system, as well as a quarterback can know a system. So that's not a concern. Number 2, off-season program. Rodgers is probably not coming to the off-season program. That's my guess. Maybe I'm wrong. So if anything, maybe this saves the Jets a little bit from, because the guys in the beat are going to be writing stories about, oh, Rodgers isn't here at the off-season program. So maybe the Jets are saving themselves a little bit from that standpoint. The benefit of going to the off-season program would be developing chemistry with receivers, and that could come into play with maybe a Garrett Wilson or an Elijah Moore. But on the other hand, the Jets are bringing in Allen Lazard, a guy with chemistry with Rodgers. There's talk about the Jets bringing in some other old Rodgers receivers. So again, from that standpoint, maybe it's not as big of a deal with Rodgers as it might be with another quarterback in another situation. So, I don't think this is super time sensitive, but because of this, I don't know that there's going to be a quick resolution. It could happen as soon as tomorrow, but this could drag out a little bit longer. And the only thing I'll say is, Jets, keep holding strong. Do not give up a first-round pick. The Packers need to trade this guy. Just think this through, Jets. The Packers got to trade this guy. You don't need to give up a first-round pick. I don't love the idea of trading a second-round pick for a one-year rental. We can get to that when we get there. But there's no reason the Jets should have to give up a first-round pick to get Rodgers. There's just, the incentives are just not there for that. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we're actually going to talk about something other than Aaron Rodgers. It's been a slow start to free agency for the Jets. They've only signed Allen Lazard. That's the only free agent they've brought in from another team. They've made attempts to sign other guys, though. They've missed out. that could impact their draft strategy, and I'll tell you how as we continue on this Thursday episode of the Locked On Jets podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. I would never put money down trying to figure out when this Rodgers trade is going to get done, but we are approaching the end of the NBA regular season. The playoffs are almost here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet does not win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scorers and threes drained. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. This podcast is free and available on all platforms. Well, the Jets have not been that active so far in free agency. They've only reached an agreement with Allen Lazard, a former Packers receiver, spent 5 years catching passes from Aaron Rodgers. Outside of that, they have not signed anybody else from another team. Now, they've re-signed some of their own guys like Quincy Williams, and of course they did reach a deal to trade for Chuck Clark, a safety from the Ravens. But other than that, it's actually been a very quiet offseason. And of course, it feels like it's been louder because of all the Aaron Rodgers buzz. But Jets have not really made many upgrades at this point, which, is not necessarily the end of the world. We're only 4 days in. And soon what's known as what I call the second wave of free agency will hit. It'll be the guys that did not get the big contracts they were seeking, guys who maybe are a little old, maybe coming off injuries, maybe for whatever reason overplayed their hands, and there can be some good bargains found in the days ahead. But the Jets have tried to sign a couple of marquee free agents, one of which, Orlando Brown, signed with the Cincinnati Bengals last night, or reached a deal with the Cincinnati Bengals last night. It's a deal that's worth around $16 million a year, a 4-year deal around $64 million, around $32 million guaranteed. That one hurt. That one hurt me because this team to me seems like a really weak free agent class. Orlando Brown was like the one guy I had my eye on. A tackle who's played very well for the Baltimore Ravens and the Kansas City Chiefs through the years. And to get $16 million, that's not a ton for a high-end tackle in today's NFL. So, I would have been willing to stretch for Orlando Brown. I'm not a big believer in big money free agents, but there are exceptions. A guy who plays a position as important as tackle, a guy who's still relatively young, especially when you're presumably bringing in Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers, not quite the Jets quarterback yet, but I guess the presumed Jets quarterback in 2023. You got a guy who's going to be 40 years old. And I know Rodgers, through his career, has had pretty good mobility, at least within the pocket. At least, maybe he hasn't been the greatest runner. He can produce a little bit on the ground, but the guy who's been great at buying time. And one of the things that's made him so special is his ability to run left or right when the pocket breaks and still make plays and throw accurate passes on the run. But even with that, I think at 40, you want to make sure you're protecting your quarterback. And, the Jets were in on Orlando Brown. Unfortunately, it just did not work out. The Bengals were able to get him. And I think, this may impact the Jets' draft strategy. I really hate going into the draft saying you need to draft X position, but I think at 13, I'm assuming the Jets keep 13. I'm assuming, which, we don't know. I'm assuming the Jets are going to hold strong. Jets keep holding strong. I'm assuming they're going to keep 13. And if they do, you almost have to take a tackle at that point. And I don't love that situation. I never like it when you go into the draft feeling like you need to draft X position because sometimes you make a mistake. Sometimes the guy you draft is not that good. And beyond that, sometimes you pass up really good players. But where the Jets are, if you're going to bring Rodgers in on a 1 to 2 year situation, you got to protect him. And you especially need to figure out the tackle position because I'm sorry, Dwayne Brown right now is, past his prime. And it sounds like the Jets may bring him back. I don't agree with that. Mekhi Becton, can you count on anything out of Mekhi Becton right now? Max Mitchell, Max Mitchell could be good. Do we want to bet everything on Max Mitchell being good, though? I don't know. And the other thing is that the way the draft is lining up this year, it seems like there could be some good tackles available, some good prospects available at 13. So I think it's all lining up for the Jets to draft a tackle with the 13th overall pick. The Jets also tried to sign Jake Brendel, San Francisco 49ers center. There were reports that Rodgers personally tried to recruit an unnamed offensive lineman, and I think we can guess it was Brendel because the Jets were not able to get him. this was always going to be a tough guy to land, though. I think that when you got a guy who gets the money he wants from his original team, and that original team is a situation as stable as the San Francisco 49ers, it's not easy. That's not an easy guy to land. I mean, I'm sure anybody's going to listen to Aaron Rodgers if they call, but a tough spot. And, so the Jets still don't have a center right now. And Connor McGovern, at the time we are recording this podcast, Connor McGovern's still a free agent. And for the life of me, I don't understand why the Jets have so little interest in bringing him back. Been a really solid player for the Jets for 3 years. I can't figure it out. I'm not trying to make Connor McGovern out to be the greatest center in the world. I'm not trying to make him out to be Kevin Mawae or Nick Mangold, but I don't know who's better out there. I don't even know that Brendel would have been an upgrade over McGovern. So again, you got to protect Aaron Rodgers. You got to help this guy out. You got to get a center in here. So maybe the Jets will go center in second round. I mean, I don't know I really don't understand the lack of commitment to McGovern. I don't understand why they just seem so content to let him go. Solid player and not an obvious upgrade out there. The Jets also tried to land Fletcher Cox, the superstar lineman for the defensive tackle from the Philadelphia Eagles. I mean, you can imagine a Fletcher Cox, Quinnen Williams duo on the inside, but the Jets apparently offered Cox more money, and of course, Joe Douglas, former Eagles executive, so probably knows Cox a little bit. Cox decided to stay with Philadelphia. Similar situation, I think, to Brendel, where he's just in such a good situation. He's been an Eagle his whole career. I don't think a couple $1 million was going to sway him, but Jets also now have some holes at defensive tackle. You look at the situation, there's still some time to sign guys. I mean, I think there are going to be some good value guys available who will sign in the days and weeks ahead. So I'm not sure it's necessarily time to panic, but it's not been a great start to free agency for the Jets. They've not really filled any holes. I mean, the one move they've made was bringing in Allen Lazard, and I think you could say that's probably something close to a lateral move with Corey Davis. I think Davis is a little bit better. You want to say Lazard's healthier. You want to say Lazard knows Aaron Rodgers better. I mean, okay, I don't think the Jets have really upgraded receiver, so there's a lot of work to be done, and part of the reason there's work to be done is Jets have also lost some free agents. As we continue on this Thursday episode of the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll get to some of the players who are not coming back to New York in 2023. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Thursday. The Jets have lost some free agents so far this year. I don't think the Jets are going to end up with compensatory picks. And if you're new to the NFL or you're not familiar with the term, compensatory picks, each year the NFL gives out extra draft picks to teams that lose more than they gain in free agency. I'd be surprised if the Jets end up in that situation, but so far they've only signed Allen Lazard and they've lost a number of free agents. Mike White, the backup quarterback, is signed with the Miami Dolphins. The Dolphins have taken a number of Jets depth players in. They also signed Braxton Berrios, and they signed Dan Feeney, backup offensive lineman. Berrios, of the three, Berrios probably has the biggest fan base among Jets fans. White, of course, is kind of a folk hero for his performance against the Bengals and then against the Chicago Bears in two of his starts. But no big losses. I think Mike White's a depth player. Berrios is kind of a guy who's the lower end of the depth chart, although Miami will be the third AFC East team he's played for because he came to the Jets from the Patriots originally. And Dan Feeney, really just a depth lineman. I think of more note is that the Jets lost Sheldon Rankins. And this one, for me, this one hurts because I thought Rankins had an excellent 2022 season playing next to Quinnen Williams after what was not a great start to his Jets career. I thought 2021 was a bit shaky, but Rankins ended up going to the Houston Texans. Yeah, this one hurts. I think, and I don't know who's starting next to Quinnen Williams at defensive tackle this year. Now, usually there's like an older defensive tackle, a guy who's trying to extend his career, a guy in his 30s who could play effectively. So this is a spot I do think the Jets should be able to fill, and there are guys out there the Jets could get, but I really like that duo between Williams and Rankins, which is funny because if you were listening back in the offseason of 2021, I told you how great that duo was going to be. Then we got to the 2021 season, and it wasn't that good. It was really Rankins more than Quinnen, but Rankins redeemed himself in 2022, and I hate to lose him. Jets also lost Nathan Shepard, a guy who is a depth player, a rotational guy, a guy who was awful in 2021, couldn't stop committing penalties, and kind of carved out a role for the team. And again, a depth player, so Jets becoming kind of thin at the defensive tackle spot. Finally, the Jets lost Nate Herbig, a guy who's kind of a good pick up off the waiver wire for the Jets last year from the Philadelphia Eagles. Ended up starting at right guard a number of games. Goes to the Steelers. Contract, not a huge contract. A contract that's, decent sized. A contract, around $4 million a year. I wish they had kept him. I mean, the Jets' offensive line's got some issues right now. I think the Jets essentially need three new offensive linemen. Maybe you could argue two, but Herbig could have helped them. I mean, he could have been a good backup if you needed to kick Elijah Vera Tucker out to tackle. Maybe he could handle the guard spot. Not a great player by any stretch of the imagination, but a solid guy. An excellent waiver wire pickup for the Jets, I think, if nothing else. So Jets losing guys, and I'm not saying panic yet because there is time to replace all these guys. None of these guys, it's not like they lost Quinnen Williams or Sauce Gardner. These are guys who are pretty solid players but not necessarily guys who are going to change everything. Not guys who are irreplaceable. The Jets can find free agents and draft picks and maybe make some trades to replace them, but there's some work to be done here. The Jets have lost a lot, and they have not gained much just yet. And of course, Aaron Rodgers could change all that very quickly. The trade for a quarterback of that caliber certainly makes your complexion of the offseason change. But at this point in time, it's been a quiet start to the offseason, despite all the talk about Aaron Rodgers. And then there actually was one more, and that's the Jets lost Jeff Smith to the Giants. So if you're devastated about that, I'm sorry. I'm sorry about losing Jeff Smith. But I think the biggest one is Rankins, and I think that defensive tackle spot, that's become a question mark. It can be fixed very quickly, and I think there are players out there the Jets can get to fix it, but it's something that they will need to address at some point this offseason. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you're listening on a podcast source, please a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube, please a big thumbs up. These things help the podcast out and help other Jets fans find Locked On Jets. Have a great Thursday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.